On the morning of October 25, 1944, the outcome of the Second World War in the Pacific was already becoming clear. The Imperial Japanese Navy was retreating, their carrier force largely destroyed, and American forces were landing on the beaches of the Philippines. To the men of the task unit known as Taffy 3, the war felt distant that morning. They were a small escort unit, stationed off the coast of Samar. Their job was routine: patrol the area, hunt for submarines, and provide support for the troops on the beach. They were not built for surface combat. They were comprised of slow escort carriers, destroyers, and smaller destroyer escorts. These were the tin cans of the fleet, with virtually no armor, designed to protect convoys, not to fight battleships. But at 6:45 a.m., the horizon changed. Lookouts on the destroyer USS Johnston spotted anti-aircraft fire in the distance. Moments later, the shapes of ships appeared through the morning mist. They were not American. Emerging from the San Bernardino Strait was the Japanese Center Force. It was the most powerful surface fleet Japan had left. It included heavy cruisers, light cruisers, and 4 battleships. Leading them was the Yamato, the largest warship ever built, displacing nearly 72,000 tons. Facing them was the USS Johnston, a Fletcher-class destroyer displacing just 2,100 tons. In any logical analysis of naval warfare, the engagement that followed should have lasted minutes. The Japanese fleet had overwhelming firepower, more speed, and greater range. Taffy 3 should have been annihilated. However, the Japanese commander, Admiral Kurita, had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed the small American ships would retreat. He did not know who was commanding the USS Johnston. That was Commander Ernest E. Born in Oklahoma with proud Cherokee heritage, he had faced prejudice throughout his life and career, but he had risen through the ranks of the US Navy on sheer competence and willpower. When he took command of the Johnston at her commissioning in 1943, he gave a speech to his crew that would become legendary. He did not promise them safety. He did not promise them glory. He told them simply, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go alone had better get off right now." Not one man left. The ship itself, the Johnston, was a Fletcher-class destroyer. These vessels were the workhorses of the US Navy. They were fast, capable of 35 knots, and armed with 5 5-inch guns and 10 torpedo tubes. But they were unarmored. Their hull plating was thin enough to be pierced by heavy machine gun fire. Against the 18-inch guns of the Yamato or the 8-inch guns of the Japanese cruisers, the Johnston was effectively made of paper. On that morning in October, as the Japanese fleet broke through the mist, Evans did not wait for orders. The American carriers turned east, running away from the enemy to launch their aircraft. Commander Evans turned his ship west, toward the enemy, toward Yamato. It is difficult to overstate the audacity of this maneuver. The Johnston was a single destroyer charging a fleet of 23 warships. She was outgunned by a factor of hundreds. Evans ordered flank speed. The Johnston surged forward, black smoke pouring from her stacks as her engineers pushed the boilers to their limit. Her target was a heavy cruiser Kumano, the flagship of the Japanese cruiser division. For 20 minutes, the Johnston closed the distance. She had to get within 10,000 yards to fire her torpedoes effectively. This meant sailing directly into a storm of incoming shells. The water around the destroyer erupted with geysers as Japanese gunners tried to find the range. Evans ordered his ship to start weaving and zigzagging, chasing the splashes of the enemy shells, betting that the Japanese gunners would adjust their aim away from that spot. Then at 10,000 yards, the Johnston opened fire with her 5-inch guns. These weapons were designed to engage aircraft and other destroyers, not heavy cruisers, and yet, the Johnston scored hit after hit on the Kumano superstructure. But guns alone would not stop a cruiser. Evans needed to use his torpedoes. He held his fire until the range dropped to just 9,000 yards. Then, he fired all 10 torpedoes in a single massive spread. He immediately whipped the ship around, retreating behind a smokescreen. Moments later, underwater explosions rocked the Kumano. The torpedoes had found their mark. The Japanese flagship's bow was blown completely off. The cruiser ground to a halt. The Johnston's success did not go unpunished. As she retreated into the smoke, the battleship Congo found the range. 3 14-inch shells slammed into the Johnston. They tore through the engine room and the aft boiler room. Moments later, 3 smaller 6-inch shells struck the bridge. The damage was catastrophic. The ship's speed was cut in half. The aft gun turrets lost power. The steering engine was destroyed. On the bridge, the scene was horrific. Several officers were killed instantly. Commander Evans was severely wounded, losing 2 fingers on his left hand and sustaining shrapnel wounds to his chest and face. Most commanders in this situation would have been justified in abandoning ship. The Johnston was a wreck. She was burning, slowing down, and surrounded. But Evans refused to leave the fight. He wrapped a handkerchief around his mangled hand and moved to the fantail of the rear, at the ship where he could steer the vessel manually, by shouting orders down a hatch to the men turning the rudder by hand. He did not order a retreat. He ordered the ship to turn back around. For the next 2 hours, the Johnston fought a battle that defied logic. Evans used his crippled ship to distract the Japanese fleet from the escaping carriers. He placed the Johnston between the enemy and the vulnerable escort carriers, laying down smoke and firing blindly into the Japanese formation. At one point, USS Johnston encountered the Japanese battleship Haruna. The Haruna displaced 36,000 tons. The Johnston fired her tiny 5-inch guns at the battleship's bridge, trying to blind her fire control. It was like throwing stones at a tank, but the aggression forced the Japanese battleship to turn away. Later, a squadron of Japanese destroyers approached to launch a torpedo attack on the American carriers. Commander Evans, spotting the threat, charged the entire squadron. He closed to point-blank range, firing his guns rapidly. The Japanese destroyers, confused by the aggression of this battered American ship, believed they were facing a much larger force. They fired their torpedoes too early, missing the carriers, and turned away to retreat. The USS Johnston had single-handedly disrupted the attack. Behind Johnston, Taffy 3 was still running for their lives. Johnston tried to keep moving. Her superstructure was torn open. Communications were broken. Men were already fighting fires with whatever they could find. Hoses, buckets, even bare hands. But then, a big shell found her. The first heavy hits did not feel like impacts. They felt like the whole ship had been lifted and shaken. Steel screamed. Panels buckled. A gun crew vanished behind a wall of smoke and flame, and when the smoke drifted, there was only wreckage where the gun turret had been. She kept shooting. Each time a gun fired, it was like Johnston was refusing to accept the size of her enemy. She kept throwing shells at Japanese cruisers that were circling for the kill, trying to drive them off, trying to buy seconds. The bridge was a ruin of shattered glass and twisted metal. Casualty reports came in half-spoken, half-shouted, and then the sea reached up and began to take her. Then at last, her guns began to fall silent. The order came: abandon ship. One by one sailors went over the side into burning oil slicks and debris, clinging to anything that floated. And then Johnston, the small destroyer that had charged battleships, paused, as if taking one last breath, and slid beneath the surface. The smoke drifted on, and Taffy 3, still running, still fighting, had been given the one thing it needed most: time. Commander Ernest Evans did not survive the battle. He was last seen on the fantail, ensuring his men got off the ship. He was never found. At the Johnston's crew of 327 men, 186 were lost. But their sacrifice changed history. The ferocity of the Johnston and the other ships of Taffy 3 convinced Admiral Kurita that he was facing the main American fleet. Fearful of American airstrikes, the Japanese admiral ordered his massive force to turn around and retreat. The invasion beaches were saved. The American carriers survived. Ernest Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Explorers finally located the wreck of the USS Johnston. She rests over 20,000 feet deep, the deepest shipwreck ever discovered. She sits upright on the bottom of the ocean, her guns still trained outward, forever ready for a fight. She remains a testament to the idea that victory is not determined by the size of the ship, or the thickness of the armor, It is determined by the spirit of the crew. The USS Johnston was a small ship, but on that morning in October 1944, she cast the longest shadow in the Pacific. Thank you for watching, or listening. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and makes it easy for others to find this type of content.